Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create. So when it comes to content distribution, one size definitely does not fit all. And so the channels that work for one company may not work for another. It's one of the reasons why I actually don't always like looking directly at what your competition is doing, because just because your competition is doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Rather than looking at your competition, we want to look at our audiences. And so today on Distribution First, I want to talk through some of the ways that I would choose the right distribution channels for a business. This is how I would end up choosing the distribution channels for my business. And it's not always cut and dry. There are a million options for you to choose when you're talking about where to distribute content and where you can share things with your audiences. And there aren't necessarily right or wrong reasons. There may be a bunch of right reasons that you don't have resources to go off and tackle. And therefore, that then makes it a wrong reason. But so often, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but so often I get overwhelmed with the amount of options there are. When you just think about all the places that we should quote unquote be active, and then you think about the amount of resources and budget that are at any given company to then distribute that content. I mean, just think about it for a minute. We're supposed to be on LinkedIn, be on Twitter, be on email, have an email newsletter. We should probably be on TikTok because I heard that's big. YouTube is massive, and so we definitely want to be in there. Are we getting our stuff on Google? What about Instagram Reels? What about, and something new, a thing like Clubhouse, now that comes and goes, but let's add in Reddit, let's add in this, let's add in that. And there's so much analysis that it leads to paralysis, and you end up not wanting to do anything but hit publish and move on. And so for me, I think one of the main things to think about before you even start distributing content is understanding the difference between demand capture and demand creation. And this is not a new concept, but I think for distribution, it's important to sort of balance those things out because you can instantly slice your content right down the middle and start to organize it by those two categories. And so demand capture, this is you're selling shoes and someone is searching for best running shoes and you serve that up for Google. Whereas demand creation is more like 7 reasons barefoot running shoes are going to change the way you walk when you're an elderly person. It's not necessarily something you're thinking about. You're not thinking about how am I going to feel when I'm 80 walking around, but for a barefoot shoe company, they may want you to think about that in order to buy their shoes. So you've got these two different spheres. You have stuff that people are already looking for, and then you have opinions and thoughts and leadership that you're trying to get out into the world. And typically companies will have both types of these contents, and you should have really 2 separate distribution strategies for those things. And so I think that what you have to do is actually split those 2 things out. You need to be able to have a strategy for both types of content and a distribution strategy for both types of content. So for your typical, maybe traditional SEO content, you might have that on one side of the chart here, if we're talking figuratively. You might have all your SEO content on one side. And that is stuff that if it's written content, you're trying to get served up in Google. And if it's video content, those are things that you might be trying to get up served on YouTube. Things that people are actively searching for. But that's not necessarily the stuff you want to put out onto other social platforms. So what is a CRM is not a very interesting piece of content to put out into the world. What are barefoot running shoes is not a very interesting topic to talk about in a Twitter thread or to put out on LinkedIn or to show off on TikTok or something. But the hidden effects your shoes are having on you could be a very interesting topic to create thought leadership around or create your opinion in the marketplace around. So that's the type of content that you want to be creating and thinking and separating out your two threads. Whereas demand capture, the channels there are very limited in terms of capturing existing demand. Where are people able to search things? And then outside of that, what are the topics that nobody will ever search, but we want to get out in the world? And what happens is oftentimes companies will blend those things. So they'll have an article that's more fit around demand creation, where they're trying to get an original thought, an idea, change a perspective, something like that. And they'll publish that and then say, okay, well, like how many keywords can this rank for? How many searches a month are we going to get for this? And if the answer is like 10 or 0, then they don't even make any content around that topic, when all they should have done is just reallocated the resources to be able to get that information out on distribution channels where you can capture the attention. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully the demand capture and creation in terms of distribution makes sense. But I think in terms of deciding which channels are right for you, the first step by and large is figuring out where your audience is at and where your audience hangs out. And it's so easy to get shiny object syndrome and to want to jump to a new platform and assume your audience is going to be there. And maybe they are there, and maybe you should do your due diligence to do that, but that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be there. Because with distribution, the whole goal is to get content in front of your audience. And so having a core understanding of where your audience is, how they consume content, what do they like, what do they not like? Do they like entertainment? Do they like education? Do they want information? And you can do this just by asking your audience, sending out a survey. What do you like to learn? How do you like to see it? What types of content would you like us to create? What would you wish we could build things around? And you can get an idea of that in terms of your audience. But what you want to avoid is putting your content in places where your audience isn't at. And so, for instance, if you're targeting B2B professionals, LinkedIn obviously makes a ton of sense. Even a channel like YouTube could make sense depending on what the topics are and what you're trying to sell. Whereas if you're in B2B and trying to hammer on Pinterest, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to bother with that. A B2B audience probably isn't there looking to get anything. However, if you were a homeschooling mom who has a lot of information and has templates and things like that, absolutely, Pinterest could make a ton of sense and LinkedIn might not make sense at all. So it's just understanding where your audience is at and what they care about before you go whole hog into a particular channel. And sometimes it's more gray, like those are extreme examples. Sometimes it's more gray and it's tougher to really understand, like, is my audience on, like for B2B, a big conversation, is my audience on TikTok? Are people really going to buy on TikTok? And some people, yes, they absolutely are. Other people are like, no, I don't think so. But at the end of the day, you kind of just want to be able to create a plan that makes it easy enough for you to decide where you should put your time, focus, and energy. And finally, when you're thinking about your distribution channels, at the end of the day, you want to think about what you have the capacity to do. So it might be awesome that you think you should be creating YouTube content and putting that out there regularly. Do you have the infrastructure in place to be able to do that? Do you have an agency who can cut your videos for you? Do you have somebody in-house who can shoot videos and write videos for you? Is that something you're willing to learn and figure out and put the time into? Because the other easy trap to fall into is to create a bunch of plans or think we need to be in a particular place, but we don't actually have the structure, the infrastructure in place to be able to do that. And that's why I think the easiest platforms to start with are, most companies have a ton of blogs, a ton of blog content. The easiest things to start to do from a distribution standpoint are text-based distribution. So things like LinkedIn, Twitter, I wouldn't suggest Facebook, but you could do that. Reddit, like these different email, like creating an email thread as part of distribution, an email newsletter as part of distribution. And so being able to think what you have and what you can repurpose and distribute, but also think about what you can create, what you have the capacity to create, and then thinking about the distribution from that as well. And then pick one or two and stick with them. The biggest downfall people have when choosing distribution channels is choosing too many of them. They try to go whole hog on every distribution channel. They don't have focus. In order to succeed on any given channel, it's not, even if there was a button where you could press it and it would go off to every channel instantaneously, just posting is not enough on most of these platforms anymore. You have to actively be engaging on the platforms for the algorithm to give you points in order to get your stuff seen. And so simply posting, even if you're posting native content, isn't enough on most platforms. You need to be active and engaging and understanding. And most of the time, companies don't have the infrastructure to be actively engaged and interesting and having back and forth with their audience on 6 different platforms. There's just not enough people and not enough time. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys as you're trying to figure out and choose which distribution channels you're trying to go after. I know for me, it's one of the biggest hangups, and as far as this distribution first mindset is simply just picking your channels. And so I would not overthink it. My advice is always to pick one, nail and crush one, and then move on from there. So if you want to start today and this week and start narrowing in what you have, think about what channels you want to hit. And I think giving yourself a little bit of freedom to say, hey, in 6 months, if we were absolutely crushing LinkedIn, if we were absolutely crushing YouTube Shorts, if we were absolutely crushing Twitter, would that be a win? And I think imagining what that could look like for you and how you can get there can give you a jumping off point to actually want to put some focus and effort into it. And then from there, you can always expand on, because a lot of the things that you learn on one channel are repeatable for other channels as well. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode, one way or another, into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.